Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the June 2nd meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. And as many of you know from check the agenda, the City Council meeting will immediately follow this meeting. This meeting is being held both in person and electronically, as will the City Council meeting. And before we begin, there's a few things to cover. Today, in the HRA meeting, community comment will be the only opportunity during the meeting for members of the public to participate, and I think the same thing is true in the council meeting. You'll be allowed to speak on anything for 3 minutes, on anything that's not on today's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. So if you would like to participate in community comment, there is a phone number, 888-504-7949. And the conference ID number is there as well. You'll have to punch that in to the phone and then press *1 to speak, and the operator will get you in the queue, and Director Benarod will bring you in to speak to the HRA at the HRA meeting this morning. Now I'm going to call the meeting to order and ask Liz Olson, our Administrative Support Specialist, to call the roll.
Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Staunton.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. Next is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We've got a meeting agenda for the HRA meeting in front of us, and it's been published to the fellow residents of Edina, so they've been able to see the agenda as well. Is there anyone who wishes to modify the agenda for any purpose? Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda as published?
So moved.
Second. Commissioner Jackson moves, Commissioner Anderson seconds. The adoption of the meeting agenda is published. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the meeting agenda as published, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And now we are back to that point in time where we talked about it a few minutes ago, community comment. If there is anyone listening in on either cable TV or edinamn.gov live meetings or on Facebook, you can participate in community comment by calling 888-504-7949. Enter the participant passcode 679180. Press *1 to speak to the operator, and they'll bring you into the HRA. Director Benarod, do we have anybody?
I do not yet have anyone on the call. There is a slight delay in the broadcast, though, so I would recommend we wait a minute or so before moving on with the agenda.
Right.
My clock shows it at 7:35. I'll come back to you at 7:36 or whenever I have a speaker, whichever is first.
Thank you.
Okay, I think it's safe for you to move on with the agenda.
All right, thank you. We will move on from community comment, and the executive director of the HRA usually responds at this point in time to any community comments that were made in the prior HRA meeting, and I don't think we have any that were made in the prior HRA meeting, so nothing for you to respond to. Is that correct?
Nothing this meeting.
All right. And then the next matter before us is the adoption of the consent agenda. For this particular HRA meeting, there's only one item on the consent agenda. It's the draft minutes of the regular meeting of May 19, 2022. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Commissioner
Second.
Jackson moves.
Second.
Commissioner Staunton seconds the adoption of the consent agenda. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And now we are on to reports and recommendations portion of the agenda, which is the heart of our meeting this morning. And our Economic Development Manager, Bill Noondorf, is with us to make a presentation on a couple of matters involving the old Public Works site.
Yes, good morning.
Welcome,
Thank you.
Mr. Noondorf.
Bill Noondorf, the city's Economic Development Manager. This morning we have two resolutions that we're asking you to take action on today. We've held public hearings recently on both of these resolutions. The public hearing was in person via telephone, and also we accepted comments online through the Better Together website. And I wanted to update you and give you some comments from what we heard at our last meeting, and then put both resolutions before you for your action. Just a quick summary, the site is 5146 Eden Avenue. It is currently vacant. It's been vacant since 2013 when the Edina Public Works facility moved to a larger location down in the industrial district. For several months we've been working on a concept with two different buyers and operators of portions of the site to construct a senior housing cooperative, about 90 units, and a new restaurant that has both indoor and outdoor seating as well as outdoor activity space. Those two uses would be next to a public park, a public open green space on the north side of the parcel. So all that is still the same. The renderings I'm sharing are the concepts we put together in the sketch plan process back in January and February of this year. There's still a lot of refinement to do. There's still a lot of details to work through and some questions to answer, and those will all happen during the rezoning and site plan approval process. But I just wanted to reshare those renderings. So the first parcel is subject to Resolution 2022-06, and that's the proposal to sell about 1.7 acres to United Properties Residential to build the senior co-op. We ran through the details of the contracts in the past. They're up on the screen. I'm not going to go through all details again, but happy to answer any questions. But instead, what I'll focus on are some of the questions that came up at our last meeting to make sure that we're responsive to that. So the sales price is $3 million. That does satisfy the appraised value of the site, considering the density that is anticipated for it. Most units would be sold at market prices. 10% though would be sold at affordable rates. And we did some updated research on what affordable means for a for sale unit. While that number changes every year, it's updated every year, it's currently about $355,000 for that affordable unit. We have had additional conversations with the owner, with the buyer. And per your request, they were willing to increase the earnest money in the deal from $50,000 to $100,000 would be deposited. It is refundable if it doesn't get zoning approvals, and just like most earnest situations, but it is non-refundable if we keep going and then they decide to back out. So those are all pretty standard provisions. There was some conversation about the future use of the restaurant and what might happen 10, 20, 30 years down the road. We do have some clarifying language that occurs in the restaurant contract that I'll walk through in just a moment. But we found some language that city staff is agreeable to, Brent and Frederick at Jester Concepts is agreeable, and United Properties is agreeable as well. So that's what you'll see in the current draft. And that brings us to the second lot. This is addressed in Resolution 2022-07. We're recommending that we sell about 0.7 acres of land to Jester Concepts to be used as the restaurant. This is the sketch from a few months ago. Still a lot of refinement to happen, but this is the concept. Sales price is $500,000, which does satisfy our appraised value. One of the comments we got during the public comment or during the public hearing was to see if we could sell the land for more, generate more revenue, which is a great suggestion. But we've done a lot of negotiating with the potential buyers. We think that the prices that we're recommending satisfies the appraised value and allows the buildings to go forward, which is very important to us. The restriction that we added or clarified about the future use of the restaurant is in section 3.13 of the contract. But we've written that and rewritten it several times in the last couple of weeks. We finally found some wording that we think we know we're all agreeable to. But it really focuses on what might happen in the second generation. We've heard clearly from the HRA that the intention is to have an activity generator next to the park and actually interacting with the park. Jester Concepts has that front and center. That's exactly what they're intending to do. But sometimes things change. And so we wanted to address, what might happen in the second generation or the third generation. So we did put language together that focuses and give the HRA rights that for the foreseeable future it would be used as a restaurant. There would be a height limitation that could be waived in the future if things change, because sometimes things change. But that waiver of the height limit would be up to the HRA. It would come back to your future people sitting in your seats in 10 or 30 years, and then they could decide. It would still have to go through the planning commission process as well to make sure it makes sense from a planning and zoning perspective. But the reason that's important is twofold. The co-op developer wants to make sure that their residents can actually see the park and not be blocked. And from the HRA perspective, it's even more important. We purposely built the park in the sunny spot. We don't want to create a big, tall building right next to it and suddenly have our wonderful new public space cast in shadow. But sometimes things change. So there's an option. It can come back to this board in the future. We might want to change our mind. But for the next 10 to 30 years, there would be some restrictions on the restaurant site. The other distinction we made in the restaurant terms are to better address what happens to the restaurant site just in case the co-op doesn't move forward. Because right now the whole timing of the restaurant is really based on the co-op. And while we fully expect it to go forward, sometimes things happen. So we did add a section that clarifies what might happen or what could happen. It gives both the buyer and the seller rights to either extend the conversation or to terminate the conversation if the co-op would not happen. And then the third distinction, or the third portion of the site is not for sale. This would be the northern portion, about 0.7 acres. This would be used as a public green space, a public park. We did put some clarifying language in the document that both of the buyers are happy that this is a park. It really builds their model. But we want to make sure that the HRA has rights as well. And so we tweaked the language a little bit where we're committing to build the green space, but recognizing that sometimes green spaces change. There's been a lot of conversation about a future train access. So we revised the language a little bit to make sure that it's used for a public use, but that public use could include transportation type uses. Doesn't mean that it's a freeway, but it means that if there's a future train station to build, this would be another location where we might want to build it. Again, that's probably a conversation for another generation or two, but we wanted to give ourselves additional flexibility while respecting the wishes of the buyers. So as I mentioned, we still have a long way to go, but we're at the point where staff has included in the packet 2 final sales contracts. The resolution 22-06 relates to United Properties. The following resolution 2022-07 relates to Jester Concepts. We've worked extensively with the buyers, their legal counsel, At Campbell Knutson, our legal counsel, Andrea McDowell-Paler, has worked extensively on these documents. We fully recommend moving forward with those. So with that, I'll rest. Be happy to answer any questions. Also this morning, Brent Frederick with Jester Concepts is with us, in case there's any questions for him. And then from United Properties, David Young is here as well. And before I forget, one other person in the room, David Anderson with Franchu Companies. Dave has worked with us quite a bit to help broker and keep the conversations going and to help buyers and sellers understand each other's priorities and find language that works. So Dave is certainly here for any questions as well. And with that, I turn it back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Noondorf. Are there questions or comments by commissioners? Commissioner Jackson?
I have some questions. I'll have comments afterwards.
Sure.
So my first question is, I didn't see a summary of Better Together or any additional public hearing input. Were there any comments on Better Together?
I did not see any, but let me triple check with Liz.
I can certainly check now and get back to you. I don't recall any, but I'll be happy to check.
Okay, thank you. My second question is for Director Vetter, actually. I know you weren't prepared for this, but when I saw you, I had a couple questions. And that's sort of about the big picture for your department as the Parks Department right now. Not about this space, but as we're looking at, making this pretty final decision to move, sever ownership. One of the things in the back of my mind, as we've been moving forward with all of this, is the capacity of the Parks Department to provide a big wow kind of event space and stuff. So if you could kind of just give us a summary as to what's happening in the other parks in Edina right now. I'm thinking specifically about the Fred Richards Park and the Braemar reconstruction, and why that might be taking more of your time than building a huge event center here at this site.
Thank you, HRA commissioners, not council members. In respect to this location here, obviously it is flowing through the HRA. It hasn't flowed through the Parks Department or the Parks Commission in this great level of detail, because obviously you're focusing on the housing portion and the restaurant portion first. Our staff has had conversations with Manager Noondorf about what this could look like, how it would come online. You are correct. Our current workload is focusing not just on the Fred Richards Park, further developing that, Braemar Park, as well as a number of other park projects. We're implementing Lewis Park playground equipment this year. We've got 3 more playgrounds to get to, as well as launch what we'll be using the Values Viewfinder tool with master planning Strachauer Park. So obviously there is kind of a queue that we're working through on other park projects to get to. And then obviously this would come kind of maybe at the tail end of that, or how we kind of find capacity to work within that. As we look at what we currently program and where we kind of have those wows, obviously when we look at entertainment related to restaurant or bringing the community in, 2 sites come into focus first. Obviously is Centennial Lakes Park, where we currently program events, music, performances, different programmatic aspects that we bring a large amount of the community into. The other is Braemar Golf Course in partnership with Red River. We're bringing a lot of evening entertainment, weekend entertainment, activities, leagues, programmatic senses on the courtyard or within and around the clubhouse that don't necessarily tie directly to golf. So those are kind of the 2 that we focus on right there. We are loosely affiliated a little bit with the performances on the plaza down at 50th in France. Obviously that's more of a private endeavor that launches there. However, we do support that through our liaison work with the Arts and Culture Commission, who takes kind of an active sense of putting in sweat equity with that partnership to bring in more student-led activities and other performances within the community to supplant the entertainment that goes on there. Did that answer your question?
It does. What I'm trying to think about is we got an email late last night saying, whoa, scrap this plan. We need something that's much more of a wow factor. And, we've looked at this, I think, 11 times now. And one of the questions that I have to answer for myself this morning is this it? And we're, this close. But all along, I've been working under the assumption that to make this site a city-owned and operated events venue, art center, whatever the dream is that's out there, would require a massive increase in what we expend on an operations business. And, you know, I was thinking, well, if we were to do that, golly, we've got all these other sites and some pretty serious development happening in two of our major parks, that to do this as a third one would be not just this site, but it would require our budget to change, it would require the Parks Department to grow, it would be capital spending, and so that's kind of where I'm getting at. That I guess the simple question I can answer is, if we were to do something like that in this site, your department would grow quite a bit. Is that a correct assumption?
Commissioner Jackson, I believe that would be a fair assessment, that we would have to find capacity in one way or another, whether that's through partnerships with the operators at the site, similar to what we do at Red River, or we would have to increase our levels of service to find more programmatic resources to bring those in. That doesn't happen necessarily automatically when you're trying to reserve a park for an event, music in the park, a movie in the park, hosting a wedding, hosting another event. That does require us to expand our capacity. It's one of the things that we are looking at currently for the Fred Richards site. If you recall that master plan, that would have a cafe, brew pub type, food and beverage type operation, where we would also have to expand in that area as well. So in a short answer, yes, it would require additional resources for our department.
Okay, great. Thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Commissioner Anderson?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Vetter, while you're on the spot here, if you don't mind, I just wanted to kind of follow up here on Commissioner Jackson's comment. And, you know, I think that's a reasonable perspective. It occurs to me, though, that we have a reciprocal relationship with the hospitality venture. And that it really, what happens on the park site is really more or less dependent on that relationship and how it works into the future. And if Commissioner Pierce were here, he would probably be asking about activation on the site. And I have that same type of question. Has that been given any further consideration on how that is actually used? Because it feels to me as if the cooperative venture there is really where we're headed in terms of questions about what can happen and how do you gear up and how do we present this into the future?
Thank you, Commissioner Anderson. We've had those internal conversations with Manager Noondorf. We have not had those with the restaurant operator or proposed restaurant operator as of yet. I think we're trying to really understand where this project is headed and what the final product might be. As you can see, it does look like a green space necessarily that could kind of be a blank canvas for programming. However, I think from our staff side, it isn't really that large. You know, when you do look at that area of green space, when you take out the ADA access and the sidewalks and where there may be plantings and public art, it isn't that large of a space, approximately about the size of a tennis court, maybe, roughly. And then how would we activate that in relationship with, I'm sure the restaurant owner would want their tables full and have their patrons serve first. So it really is going to require a lot of conversations and balance on what is the appropriate number of events? Are we running them? Are they running them? Does it still serve the public? Do we preempt weekends? Do we block them off for certain items where we say this has a maximum of 8 programmed events by Park and Recreation a year, so they can still have their meet their economic goals through that process? So we haven't gotten into that level of detail at all as of yet, but I think those conversations would need to occur.
Okay, thank you. The operators here, I wonder if you have any expansion on those thoughts.
You bet. Morning, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Could you give us your name and your
Brent Frederick with Jester Concepts.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, we've definitely been giving it some thoughts. We haven't had any discussions with the Parks Department. We had an initial meeting, and I think that got some juices flowing a little bit. I think there's a lot of ideas out there, and what ones stick and what ones don't, who's programming. I think what really matters is that we're on board with collaboration. And if the Parks Department doesn't have the capacity, and we're happy to program. So I think we just need to have the conversation, but we're completely open to doing the programming within reason. We've talked about hiring a full-time kind of programmer, someone to activate the space, and our green space as well. So it's definitely on the table. We're happy to have the conversations during the due diligence process. So, or sooner than that, it's fine with us. So.
Thank you, Mr.
Is that
Vedder.
good? Okay.
Manager Noondorf, I've got a couple of questions. I don't think Commissioner Staunton has any questions at this time. All right. These are the same questions that I had when we had the public hearing, and I think I'm looking for some affirmation from you. To Commissioner Jackson's point, we've been working on a concept that we like for over a decade on this property. And we finally found one that we're all excited about. And I like the way Commissioner Staunton has always put it. We got a park, and we got these kind of accessory uses next to the park with the restaurant, and the sort of seamless use of those properties together to create the sense of a larger park than what would just be the 0.6 acres, I think slightly over half an acre of park. So the question for me is what I had last time too, is it appropriately priced? And I think you've indicated that, in your opinion, with the appraisal that we got, it's appropriately priced. We know that we could have sold it all to the private sector as one parcel, one 3.3 acre parcel, and gotten more money for it, but that wouldn't have necessarily meant we'd get the uses that we want over there, or the kind of traffic management, if you will, that we'd want there. As with the senior co-op and the restaurant and the park, I think we're getting that. And then the terms and conditions of the respective agreements, I take it those are acceptable to you, that we want to secure with respect to both the publicly and privately owned portions of this 3.3 acre piece of property. Is that still a fair statement?
I would agree with all of those comments. In order, so the uses and the densities on the site really relate not to maximizing the value or maximizing the density, but to end up with the best product. And that's been articulated, I think, most clearly in the Grandview Small Area Plan from back at the Development Framework Plan from 2012. So many years ago, when the question was posed to the group, do we just sell the land for the highest dollar? The direction was, no, that's not what the Small Area Plan called for. They called for creating a place that had public uses and private uses. So we feel that this combination of uses is what's been anticipated for about 10 years now. And that does relate to price, because while the sales prices satisfy the appraised amounts, it's not the maximum, but we're not trying to put the maximum on the site. So those two things go hand in hand. Certainly from a sales perspective, I would love to sell them for more, but we want to see something built here. And especially with the cost escalation we're seeing in all construction sectors, as well as just the basic economics of for sale housing, the more we would raise the price, you're potentially strangling the viability to actually get those projects built and open to be and operating successfully. And I think our intention here has been to get a vibrant, filled housing building and a vibrant, activated restaurant. And we think those sales prices get us there. And then finally, for the activation of the space, that's something we've talked about quite a bit. And in the terms and conditions of the contracts, we did address it. We decided in the sales contract it's really not appropriate to get into detail about what activation means. Is that an event every day, every week, every month? I think that's a conversation that's best placed to occur during the due diligence process and through the conversations about the site design and the zoning approvals. So those conversations will happen in greater detail in the next few months. But that detail is just one of many that's embedded in the terms and conditions. We've negotiated this for several weeks or months. It all kind of blurs together. I'm fully supportive of where we are. I think we found that happy spot between staff's interest to look out for the goals of the HRA, our city attorney's interest to be our attorney, make sure we're signing language that makes sense, while also respecting the needs of both buyers, both Jester and United Properties. So I'm fully supportive of these two contracts.
That prompt any further questions or comments from commissioners? I think Commissioner Jackson, you had some comments you wanted to make.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So at our public hearing, we got a comment that this does not maximize the value. So it's not a question, Bill. These are comments. But we got a comment that this doesn't maximize the value, like you said. And I know in the Planning Commission, there was a complaint that this wasn't a tall, mixed-use apartment building. And that's one option that we could have done for this site. But that doesn't serve the public nature of what we, as a commission, have looked at. My comments are this is kind of permanent. We're severing ownership with this contract, or the potential to. And so I think it's a good time to take a pause and just think about all the work that we've done and whether we're on the right path. But I reject maximizing the value. I think that there's some public purposes that we can serve here, and that's an important part of this Grandview plan and this core center neighborhood of our city. The second complaint was that it could have been more exciting. We could have done something really big and public, and we have looked at that, and that's where my questions with Director Vetter were going. I think what we have done here is we found private actors to meet these public ends, and I think that's kind of clever. And I'm kind of pleased with that. And another thing that came out of the Planning Commission is the Student Commissioner, William Hayward, said, I don't remember a time when this wasn't a blank piece of land, an empty piece of land. And that's just kind of sad. It's time to do something. And we've looked at this a million ways to Sunday. We thought about, we had the first concept that we looked at was, I think shortly, it was in the fall of 2020 after I was elected, but before I was seated, and that was the medical center, the little park, and the co-op, and that's kind of has that feel of that Grandview Square, and nobody even knows that park is back there except for the people in that development, and that's not what we wanted here. And so we've been working on this, and we have found two private actors to achieve our public ends here. And I think it's really important to say that these are patient, agreeable, and competent partners. And this has the potential to do some really interesting and exciting things. I think, the ownership opportunity is a really good one. I think having a fun restaurant there can activate that space, and the potential for growth and excitement there exists in this sale. But I do think it's really important to note that these are good people to work with, and this has been a long and complicated process, and I think good partners are an important factor, and so I am in favor of these sales. And thanks, everybody, for continuing to work and get mutually agreeable terms on this. So that's all, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Henderson, any comment? All right. Commissioner Sutton.
I just wanted to follow up. Director Vetter talked about the size of the park area as a tennis court. And I did a little bit of math. And the dimensions of a tennis court are 78 by 36, which is about 2,800 square feet. And a half an acre is about 21,000 square feet. So I think it's bigger than a tennis court. And I just don't want to leave the impression out there that it's not, that it's that small a space. I think what you're trying to say in terms of the whole kind of park won't have that much space that's usable. but in terms of a flat playing space that you could use. But I just don't want people to think it's just a postage stamp. There is pretty sizable. And then as we've discussed, it does, the idea also is to make this not have a bright line between this and the restaurant property that does have some green space as well. So I think it will be a bigger feel to it. And I just wanted to make sure that impression wasn't left with anybody watching. Thanks.
Ms. Olson.
Commissioner Jackson, to follow up on your question earlier, there were 0 comments on Better Together regarding this.
Thank you.
All right, good, thank you. For me, I'd say as long as I've worked on this, and not nearly as long as Commissioner Staunton, who was part of the original group of 52 people that looked at uses over here and established those guiding principles that are being followed in significant part here, I think. We are finally getting what we want for the site, and it's something to be very excited about. I think it's appropriately priced based upon what we want to see on the site. The terms and conditions of the agreement are such that they're acceptable to us on what we want to secure for uses on this public portion of the property and the private portions of the property. I thought Commissioner Jackson said it well, that we've got good partners here. And I think we're ready to move to the next step. So I'll ask Commissioners, is there one of you that would care to move adoption of resolution 2022-06, approving the contract for private development and sale of property to United Properties Residential LLC?
So moved. So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Anderson moves, Commissioner Jackson seconds the adoption of resolution 2022-06. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving resolution 2022-06, which would authorize the contract for private development and sale of property to United Properties Residential LLC, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then the next resolution is its traveling companion, resolution 2022-07, which would approve the private development contract and the sale of property to Gesture Concepts LLC for the restaurant piece, and that's about 0.72 of the 3.3 acres. Is there someone who wants to make that motion?
So moved.
Second.
A motion by Commissioner Staunton, seconded by Commissioner Jackson to approve resolution 2022-07, contract for private development and sale of property to Gesture Concepts LLC. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the resolution 2022-07 say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried? Good. Thank you, Manager or Director Noondorf. You did really first-rate work on all of this. And Dave Anderson, thank you for your guiding hand here as we went through this last phase of work on this particular piece of property. And we know we've got many things to decide in front of us here, but we've taken the next step and on to the next one now. So, thank you. As it turns out, it's been quite a good staging area for everything Director Milner's doing over there, plus the pedestrian bridge. I don't know what we would have done without that staging area. All right, we got one other matter in front of us this morning, and that's just an update by Director Milner on the project, we call it the U.S. Bank project at 7001 France Avenue, which is really quite a transformational project in that Southdale district, which, I think we all believe is setting the tone for how redevelopment will occur there in the future. And so, Manager Noondorf, Director Noondorf, thank you for the update. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. As you mentioned, we've been working on this project also for a very long time. The developer has been working on it even longer. This is the property at 7001 France Avenue, currently home to U.S. Bank, and soon to be a home to a new bank on the site. We wanted to bring an update to you because a lot has happened in the last couple months. And the city staff, the developers, the legal reps, the financial folks are running hard to keep this project moving forward. We're running faster than I was expecting to. So we are working on bringing 2 full TIF agreements to you later this month. And so I wanted to give you a progress update so you have a better idea what to expect at our next meeting. There's been some clarifications, a couple revisions, no major changes, but they're important revisions. I wanted to bring them to your attention so as not to surprise you when we bring you a 500-page stack of legal contracts. We have all the key folks are in the room this morning in case there are any questions, but we'll try to keep this brief in respect of our time limit today. So I mentioned there's been a lot of progress. I'll walk through that. City staff and myself, we still continue to recommend the use and issuance of 2 TIF notes, one for the first phase, one for the second phase. That's all the same. None of that has changed. Run through some of the renderings here. So just for clarification purposes, we refer to the site as sites A, B, C, and D. A is the residential high-rise with the public parking and all the site work, all the roads that go in, all the underground, that's all part of Phase A. And then B is the office, C is the parking structure, D is the bank, but the bank is not part of the TIF agreement, so we don't really mention D at all. It's not included in any of the contracts. Let's see, so the basic terms have not changed, but here's what's happened to date, and if you've driven by, you've seen a lot of this happening. So since we last met with you in March of this year to talk about creating a TIF district, Mortensen has gone forward and acquired the site, so they are now not just under contract, they own the site. We mentioned earlier that we've been awarded a deed contract to help with some of the demolition costs and some of the site costs, so that's always good news. I think even more important news is that the developer has selected an equity investor for the first phase. So their financing package is really starting to come together quick, and tax increment financing is one of those important pieces of that whole financial package. So right now, Mortensen is really running hard with this. Orion Investments, one of the, I'll say, co-developers, running just as fast, maybe faster on a couple of the things. They're under contract to buy the second phase, which would be the office phase. And they're actively working on the marketing to find those tenants for that space. They're working hard there and making some progress, getting some good interest. All this is happening in the same context where I mentioned cost escalation, price escalation. Nothing's getting cheaper. So we're still negotiating, or not negotiating, but still navigating through those waters. There's also been a lot of construction activity. The first building has been cleared, it's demoed, it's gone. That included some environmental abatement of that building before it got demolished. And site work has begun for the new bank. And this is also one of those multi-phase projects where the bank has to relocate first before anything else can happen on the site. But the good news is that's started on schedule, on time, and it's running fast. And I mentioned that the tax increment financing agreements. So about a week and a half ago, the developers' architects submitted their final site plan approvals for both the residential and the office. So various city staff folks are reviewing that, getting some tweaks to it, but that's expected to come to the city council in June 21st. And we are intending to also present our TIF agreements to the council on the 21st and then the HRA on the 30th. So I was not expecting to bring those to you until maybe this fall, maybe next winter, but we'll be here in 2 weeks. There's 4 things I wanted to touch on today. Staff is fully in support of these 4 changes. Most of them are just refinements. They're really intended to address the marketplace and what we're seeing out there. So the first refinement is, rather than creating one 500-page TIF contract for the whole deal, we're going to bring you 2 separate TIF contracts, one for the residential site A, and then all the road work and site work on the property. That'll be one standalone contract. And then there'll be a separate contract for site B, which is the office and the parking. The way that the equity investors are lining up for this project, it makes sense to have 2 separate deals. We knew that was an option. but we didn't, until they actually selected that equity investor, we didn't know which way we were going to write it. So you'll see 2 contracts rather than 1. The terms are the same. The fundamentals are the same, being that the risk rests with the developer. Upon completion, we would issue a TIF note and then pay down that TIF note over a 15-year period. So that all the big risk has not changed. But the only risk that is a little bit different is what happens if Site B doesn't move forward. We all want it to go forward. We all expect it to go forward, but what if? Site B is on that prime corner. It's a very visible location. So as we've figured out how to separate the 2 agreements, we have added some language about if the office doesn't move forward by a certain time, they will be required to do some kind of basic landscaping so that that site on the corner isn't just a hole in the ground. And again, these are all worst case scenarios. We hope we never go there, but just in case, we want to make sure that our interests are protected. And in this case, it's the reputation and it's that general appearance of the construction site. The second item is the development time frame for the office. There's still a lot of uncertainty out there. The developer had asked to add 12 months to the original deadlines to build the office. Again, ideally, we want to build them both at the same time. It's the most cost-effective and efficient way to do it. But just based on where we are in the marketplace with the price escalation, staff thinks that adding 12 months is fine. So that's not a big deal. And we're also agreeable to that extension because the developer is agreeable to do the right thing in case there is a delay. That is, not leave a junky-looking site during the interim steps. So we've added a couple paragraphs, actually probably a chapter, to the contract that addresses this temporary condition, just in case it happens. The third thing we've added or refined is a provision that talked about if the office does not move forward in this shape. The HRA had negotiated to make sure that there would be a substantial commercial building on that corner. That was the reason we created the TIF district. It wasn't for the luxury housing. It was to get the new jobs, to get the new site work, to get the new plaza, the public parking, all those things. So just in case that doesn't happen, we want to make sure that we're covered. And we can still, at some point, be delivered jobs, parking, plazas, roads, that kind of thing. So it's really just a refinement. It's really in the weeds, quite honestly. But it's something that we've spent several weeks negotiating these terms with the developer. I think we're almost there. We don't have all the final wording figured out, but we will in 2 weeks. But a lot of these restrictions and limitations are really to look for the interest of the HRA, which is to see this site redeveloped, not just for an apartment building, but for the mixed use, for the apartment, the office, the retail, the parking, the plaza, et cetera. So in the future TIF agreement, you will see some limitation or some additional chapters that we don't normally include. But for a project of this scale, I have to say we learned a lot from the Pentagon Revival project, which is an even more complicated multi-phase project. But in that contract, we had some very basic safeguards in case things took longer. We did not anticipate a 2-year pandemic with that project, but we've all gotten a little bit smarter. So there is some extra provisions in these contracts that staff feels good about, and the developer will be agreeable to them. We're still working through that, but we're aiming at the same thing, which is helpful. And then the fourth thing, just an update. We've been having some really good meetings and conversations with the architects of the public parking. Since the parking structure is used for private uses for the tenants for some parts of the day and then by the public and other parts of the day, we wanted to make sure that the public safety is front and center on this parking garage. There's always a perception of parking structures, especially larger ones. And so since there is a public use component of this, We've had some great meetings with the architects to do some refinements about safety and security, as well as some operational issues. So in the final version of the documents that are going to be submitted, if you look closely, you'll see some tweaks to the parking structure. All those changes are intended to address and improve the security, safety, and operations. So as I mentioned, we've had some really good meetings with them. I think we're all looking at the same goal line to reach. But I just wanted to update you on those 4 refinements and let you know that you can expect to see 2 big contracts at the end of this month. With that, happy to answer any questions. If not, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Questions for Director Noondorf? Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The one thing that triggered an idea in my head as you were speaking is, if the office building is not built and we put in grass and trees or grass and bushes, I just want to put it out there in the public sphere that then the expectations will change and people will see that as a green space, and it makes it more difficult in the future then to build something there. And I just want to voice that, because I've seen that where the people, oh, this is lovely. It's green, it's open, there's nothing there. We really like this. Please don't build there. So I just want to put it out there because we want to see this as a commercial, active, people-driven development. And I don't know if there's a legal way of doing that or anything. It probably isn't, but I just want to voice that concern.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other comments? Commissioner Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so you mentioned the deed grant that was recently achieved, and I think that was the same grant reported in Finance and Commerce on April 21st. It was $250 million. But it's not, that doesn't go to the developer, I understand. What is the amount that the developer receives under that grant?
Yeah, so I think the entire program was $250 million.
That's correct.
Yeah, so this project was awarded up to $650,000.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
I bet the developer would have liked a $250 million grant.
That's good. Okay, the distinction and ongoing distinction and separation of Tract A from B and C, or Parcel A from Parcel B and C. And that's really essentially because of equity investors' questions or their issues involving complete separation there, so that there's no question about them being tied together. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yeah. Initially, when we negotiated the term sheets, we didn't know if it was going to be one equity investor or multiple. And so the term sheet kind of gave both options. In this case, there will be multiple equity partners in this for each site. And so exactly to your point, we wanted to make sure that each deal could stand on its own and know with certainty what the future looks like for each of those sites.
Okay, thank you. Your point two here is the 12-month extension on development on sites B and C, which I don't find unusual. But what's the apparatus in the event that B and C really don't occur? We're looking at 22 million, but really only 5 on Tract A, Parcel A, and then the remainder is really relegated to B and C. So if that didn't occur, because you're discussing a note of uncertainty here in forward movement. If that doesn't occur, what's the apparatus? How does that disassemble? What do we do there?
Yeah, great question. So the way that we read our TIF contracts are to offer the incentive, the financing, upon successful completion. So when Site A, the residential, that gets built, all the roads get built, all the sidewalks get built, all the stormwater gets built, the intention is to award a $5 million TIF note to help pay for all that infrastructure work. If that's where it ends, Site B doesn't move forward, we only have a $5 million TIF note for those roads. So the $17 million TIF note in that situation would never be issued. So that's the absolute worst case scenario. I don't think it would ever end there because the developer didn't spend all the money to buy the land to have it just sit there forever. So we've addressed, well, if the office isn't viable and they have to downsize it, that's okay. They have to go back through zoning and, get the PUD amended. That's a possible outcome. If they downsize the office, they would then have to come back to this body, the HRA, and renegotiate the TIF terms. Maybe the 17 million doesn't make sense. Maybe it's not needed. Maybe it's 10 million. Maybe it's zero. So if the site plan were to change dramatically, the TIF agreement would be null and void. We'd come back to the table and start over. The other scenario is if the office market would just not be there. There's no demand. And something goes horribly and the developer just isn't moving for some reason. These are so, the more I talk about it, it's such a, I can't even think of the percentage of chance this would even happen. But if that worst case scenario happens and they don't hit their deadline dates to get started, and they don't have an approved plan anymore, and something's not viable in the marketplace, what we're going to add to the contract is that the public benefit of Site C is preserved. We don't want it reduced to a surface parking lot and a drive-through. That's not why we created a TIF district. And I don't even know if our zoning code would allow that, but I don't want to take any precaution or any chances on that. So what could happen is two safeguards. One, will build in, Site C will have an early use restriction on it, that it has to be used for some kind of public parking, public benefit. And then if they miss all the deadlines, they're willing to give this body, the HRA, an option to purchase the land. So, and that would be the land on Site C. Because Site C has been where we've talked about all the public benefit, all the parking, the public realm, et cetera. So they'd give us an option to purchase with enough time to still make the 5-year rule to use any tax increment. And then this group has some control and leverage. Maybe we want to build district parking on our own. Maybe we don't. Maybe we want to let it go to the market. But they're willing to give us an option. So those are the 3 different scenarios I could see happening. Right now, we're all aiming at Plan A, which is to get a 250,000 square foot office building with retail constructed on that hard corner. But things are hard out there. Cost increases, interest rates are going up. So just in case, we wanted to have some extra safeguards, and that's what you'll see in 2 weeks.
That's useful in clarification. Thank you. We have time still to talk about this as details emerge. That's useful. Thank you. On Site C, on the proposed parking ramp, you are mentioning safety, security, functional, and aesthetic requirements to reconsider those. And it feels as if from your presentation and the elevation that you're showing that these are improvements, that you've considered the process and that you're actually improving the utility of that parking ramp. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
So the aesthetic improvement, how would you describe that? And how did that come about? Because that's not necessarily something that is thought about often.
Yeah, good question. So I would describe it more as a refinement. The general architectural theme is the same. Trying to keep the general cost about the same. But most parking garages in Edina are privately owned, privately operated, and privately funded. This one, they're asking for a big TIF note and willing to give us the public use right. That's where I feel compelled to be a little bit more involved in that. So a lot of the refinements are subtle. The initial plan showed for the exit stairways to be enclosed on 3 or 4 sides with solid walls. And in our experience, people don't feel safe in a parking garage that you can't see inside of the stairway. So we've been working with the architects and the owners to get more glass so that you can see into the stairway, both from the outside and from the inside, just so that people don't feel that they're entering into a place that they should be on guard. Well, everyone should be on guard, but we don't want to create places that feel insecure. So it's those types of refinements. And also working with some of the functionality of the garage. Where do you dump the snow? Some things we've learned from past projects, you have to think about that early on. In this site, it's a tall building. If they dump it over the side, they would kill all the landscaping that our planning commission and our zoning codes require. So we just have to be thoughtful about those things. And right now the plans, they're still in an early phase. So they won't even be able to start building any of the office or residential until the bank is completed next year. But yet to get the financing, we've got to walk by their side and sign and get the TIF agreements going. So we've been pushing to get more of the detail refined now rather than waiting 12 months or 18 months. And that's just due to the timing of the whole thing. But they're really refinements. There's no radical change. It's basically the same. The users will experience the same thing. It should just feel safer and a little bit brighter.
Okay, thank you. Last question, the separation of A from B and C, and the potential for an option on the part of the HRA, on the city, really, to acquire that site if the project were to not be developed as proposed. Do we have an appraisal on the relative value of the sites themselves? Like Tract A, do we have an appraisal on Tract A?
We do not have an appraisal, and I don't think we'll have an appraisal in the next 2 weeks. But I think we have something better. We have a recent sale that shows what the value of the land is in the marketplace today. So that's what we're pegging it off of.
What would that be?
I don't have all the details, but
Well, you can follow up with it at a later date.
We'll have
That's
that for you
okay.
in 2
I'm
weeks.
just trying to understand, if we have an option on B and C, what's the value of that? It's $12 million for the site itself. And we can't just divide 3 into that 12 and say, oh, gee whiz, they're all worth 4. They're not.
Right.
They're not the same. So as we consider that, and it's premature, really, I'm putting the cart before the horse, but here we are today. And I just wanted to bring that out because I think in the future that'll be important, and it would be good to know what we're working with going in.
Agreed.
But thank you so much. Nothing further.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Anderson. Commissioner Sutton, anything? All right. Thanks for the update. It's nice to get these. It's interesting to see how quickly you're moving from a staff standpoint and the developers moving as well. This is one of the most prime commercial corners in the state of Minnesota, and certainly the city of Edina. So I don't have any doubt that we're going to get something good on that corner with respect to what we call B and C. And I think one of the beauties of what all of you worked on here was the use of these 2 TIF notes, and that A, which is the tower, which will go up first, generates that $5 million in TIF, but we're going to get everything we wanted out of that site based on that first go-around with Site A, the streets, the pocket park, all of the improvements that we want, site improvements, so, which I think was really quite, I guess clever is one word you could use, but quite foresightful, I think, by both you and the development team. And so this separation is something we've always talked about, and I think appreciate your update. So thank you. All right. Any further comments from executive or from the commissioners or the executive director? All right. Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn the HRA meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
A motion by Commissioner Jackson, second by Commissioner Staunton to adjourn the HRA meeting this second day of June 2022. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adjourning the HRA meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. We stand adjourned. We've got just a couple minutes to switch over systems, and then we'll handle the city council meeting. HRA stands adjourned.